Where is Shadow? Do you really think that the professor created him, Shadow, to carry out the revenge on all those who live here on Earth?
Bites more than having to listen to this dreadful conversation.
Eggman, you bite!
Stories in Sonic the Hedgehog games are like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get. Most of you probably don't understand that reference. But in all actuality, I can't think of a series that has just gone through so many different identities throughout the years as the Little Blue Talking Rat franchise. But is this for the better? Is this good? Should Sonic have serious stories? Well, let's do a deep dive into that question. To understand Sonic stories, you must kind of first understand the history of the Sonic franchise. Briefly, let's not waste your time over here. I know time is important to you. But the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise was born to compete with Mario. Sonic was meant to be seen as like the cool, edgy version of Mario. For example, take a look at this picture right here. He's so cool. He's playing a guitar. And not only that, he's wearing headphones nowhere near where his ears are supposed to be. Does it get much cooler than that? I don't think so. On some level, they are kind of like speed-based platformers. I know people don't think of that when they think of Mario, but if you watch anyone speedrun a Mario game, you'll find out pretty quickly, especially in the 2D games, going fast is something you can do. Major categorical differences when it comes to the storytelling of the Mario franchise and the Sonic franchise could not be more stark. The average Mario story is about the plumber going wahoo, jumping around and saving a princess. The storytelling of the Mario series is kind of meant to be very limited as far as like the 3D mainline platformers go, because the real magic of a Mario and Nintendo game is that you're going to get something that's extremely polished with extremely good gameplay. Gameplay first, story is a much larger afterthought. Compare that to the stark contrast of some of the stories and moments you'll see in Sonic the Hedgehog games. I think that's the reason why many people are gravitated to him in the first place. Look at moments like this.
Let's do it!
More on this later, but the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise initially started off with pretty light stories. I mean, given the fact that the technology was very primitive at the time, there wasn't really much story you could tell in these games. I mean, as early as Sonic CD, you start to see what Sonic was about with this opening cutscene that kind of just shows like this is the anti-Mario. This guy is here to maybe tell a story greater people would have imagined for a blue talking cartoon character hedgehog. And furthermore, a game like Sonic 3 and Knuckles kind of shows, even given that limited technology, they were trying to tell a crazy story. I mean, look at the mural up top that kind of foreshadows the Doomsday Zone. You have a story of friendship. You have a story of betrayal. You have a continuous story nonetheless. I mean, the way the story progresses through the cutscenes is something that was kind of revolutionary for the time. It was clear that from early on, the original intention of Sonic stories was to be something that was to be taken a little bit more seriously, as evidence when you progress through the franchise's history with the first true 3D outing with Sonic Adventure. Akinori Nishiyama served as a story event director and scenario writer for the game, and boy, did he cook. He was able to juggle 6 different concurrent stories that were intertwining and weaving throughout, with tons of lore that still sticks to this day. When you think about the Echidna tribe, you think about Tikal, you think about Knuckles, Chaos, you think about all the lessons that are learned in the story. You learn about a power-hungry ancient tribe's quest for power, which eventually led to its downfall. You learn about what it means to be your own person and stop living in your idol's shadow. You learn about your purpose and your past. You learn about how to take care of the weak and learn to stand up for yourself. You learn what it means to protect those you love, even if it means destroying those around you and yourself. You even learn how to recover your frog friend who runs away from you. All jokes aside, it's clear that Sonic Team's ambition with this story was something that really separated from pretty much any other platformer franchise or franchise that was directed at the same age demographic. Sonic was meant to be a little bit more serious in terms of its storytelling. And to this day, a lot of people clamor for the adventure type storytelling because they think that these are the best stories the game has ever had. Then the next game after Sonic Adventure 1 was Sonic Adventure 2, which in my opinion is the best Sonic story ever told. I mean, there's a reason why this game is getting adapted for the 3rd Hollywood blockbuster movie. It's because it's widely viewed as the best story that they ever had in terms of writing, characterization, backstory. This is the first game where Shiro Meikawa served as one of like the main writers for the Sonic franchise, and he is a popular name within the fan base because a lot of people love the games that he wrote or contributed to, including Adventure 2, including a lot of the early 2000 Sonic games, and he even helped supervise write Sonic X Season 3, which a lot of people consider to be the best season of the show. But back back to the plot and significance of Sonic Adventure 2. To not even go fully in depth on the game's story, the game includes a backstory with a government conspiracy theory to shut down a research facility used to cure a terminal illness, which ends up with the death of a professor's young granddaughter, with the manipulated hedgehog's memories to carry out revenge against humankind. Like, to not even do the full story, I mean, just right there, it shows how in-depth some of these stories were. And then the game ends up with chill-inducing moments where Sonic and Shadow go super to team up to save the world at the last minute, which culminates with the supposed death of Shadow the Hedgehog, because technically this was supposed to be the last Sonic game, so Shadow was supposed to die. He just came back with popular fan demand. Like, all the moments in this game just give you the absolute chills, and anyone who played this game through the years growing up will always remember this game for its story. Unfortunately, after Sonic Adventure 2, the Sega Dreamcast and Sega as a hardware manufacturer as a whole had ceased to exist. So the future of Sonic was looking pretty bleak. That was until Sega decided to keep the Sonic franchise afloat and keep their company afloat as a whole by swapping over to a game publisher as opposed to a hardware manufacturer or console manufacturer. And Sonic Heroes was the first game that was a result of this move, and it was the first multi-platform Sonic game. And the storytelling in this game definitely took a little bit of a step back. Not that it was bad, like the characterization of the characters was definitely still on point, but story was something that took a little bit of a backseat. While there was still an interesting overarching plot, like in my opinion, growing up, seeing the Neo Metal Sonic plot twist at the end definitely blew my mind as a kid. This was my first Sonic game also, so it was my first experience like seeing Super Sonic, and that's kind of those chill-inducing moments that kept me coming back to Sonic over and over again. But yeah, overall, the tone of the Sonic series and Sonic franchise remained largely unchanged throughout the years, up until about 2006 with Sonic 06. That was probably the biggest franchise-changing moment. Shiro Miyakawa wrote most of the Sonic stories going forward, other than Shadow the Hedgehog, which is written by Takashi Iizuka, I believe. Sonic 06 was probably the biggest turning point for the franchise. After this game flopped, it was clear that Sega wanted to go into a different direction, which is why it did kind of a complete 180 with the gameplay and even somewhat of the storytelling with Sonic Unleashed. And although the story kind of adhered to a lot of the similar principles, it was definitely a step back and a little bit more lighthearted, but it still had the great characterization. Although it's not too crazy that Sonic Unleashed had a little bit of a different tone for the story, well, still pretty good because it was actually written by Kyoko Yoshimura. I guess you could say, though, the real true tonal shift probably happened after Sonic and the Black Knight. Ironically enough, this is a game that a lot of people in the franchise consider to be the best voice acting and characterization and personality of Sonic the Hedgehog. And to no surprise, this is the last game that Shiro Miyakawa, the original writer for Sonic Adventure 2, had involvement with writing the story for. Because we then move into the meta era, which is kind of where this discussion even happens. So before we move on to the meta era, which is games like Sonic Colors, Sonic Forces, Lost World, Generations, I want to talk about a defining name for this era of Sonic storytelling. A lot of people considered Sonic to be a shonen protagonist in the early years of the franchise. A shonen protagonist is a character in manga or anime. Shonen protagonists are often characterized by contradictory qualities, such as being short-tempered and cool, or mischievous and rebellious. They may also appear to be good for nothing but have hidden abilities. Another common trait of shonen protagonists is having a lot of talent in a specific area, such as a fighting potential, heroic instincts, or a unique power. Shonen media often explores themes like friendship, perseverance, heroism, and coming of age. Some popular shonen series include Dragon Ball, Naruto, One Piece, My Hero Academia, and Attack on Titan, but adults can also enjoy these stories. So when you think about the early stories that Sonic used to tell, the word shonen is something often some fans may associate him with. Keep that in mind as we move on to the next era of storytelling, which has a very, very stark contrast.
Eggman, I am going to save this planet, and I am going to free these aliens. No copyright law in the universe is going to stop me!
So as you can tell by that cutscene right there, Sonic Colors marked the departure from those more serious stories and the shift into the more Saturday morning cartoon, lighthearted stories that did not have these existential battles, crazy life lessons, and battles against demon gods. It turned out to be just Sonic versus Eggman. And honestly, this is something that was needed at the time because most Sonic games that were received in the era of shonen, quote unquote, were not really received well, unfortunately. This is when once again the writing staff for Sonic games changed. We now had Ken Pontac and Warren Graff as the writers. To be fair to both of these individuals, it did come out in an interview recently that they had very little say in the franchise and the Sonic team writing directions. To cut them a little bit of slack, that's context that needs to be added in there. And basically every game for the next 10 years, Sonic Colors, Sonic Generations, Sonic Lost World, were very lighthearted and bare bones stories. And here's the thing, this worked. Sonic Generations and Sonic Colors are two of the highest received Sonic games of all time. time. They had the lighthearted stories, but the thing about these games is that the gameplay was really good, kind of similar to the Mario formula. So for a little bit, this was the direction of the Sonic franchise, and it seemed to be working. The games were kind of revived a little bit, but what happens when this stops working and the games start getting received poorly? You had a flop with Lost World, which had once again one of those like more lighthearted stories. You also had the Sonic Boom debacle, and then Sonic Forces releases, and this was probably the final straw for the fans as they were left disappointed with this game. It tried to capture the essence of some of those older Sonic stories, but didn't quite work. Now, Sonic fans are looking for a new direction. Sonic Movie 1 releases, and it's a huge success and brings a lot of new eyes into the franchise. It was once again reeling, but now with this new influx of fans, a reset was once again in order.
You are the key.
Sonic Frontiers was released in 2022, and this felt like it was Sega's last chance almost to make a good 3D Sonic game. Since there was a bunch of flops, people were wondering, is Sonic Team capable in the current day and age of making a solid 3D platformer? And I think Frontiers answered that question for a lot of people. It wasn't perfect, right? I mean, there's obviously some issues with the game. It wasn't unanimously loved, but it was received a lot better than most people thought it was going to be, receiving an 8.5 out of 10 fan score, with a lot of people actually enjoying this game, including myself. This is actually one of my favorite 3D Sonic games ever made. And one of the biggest things about this game was the return to form with a more serious story or a higher stakes story. It was definitely a somber and melancholy story that delivered a lot of Sonic fans extremely memorable moments like the Titan fights, as well as the transformation into Super Sonic 2. For what it's worth, I do have my issues with Frontier's story. I don't think it's the best Sonic story that's ever been, but one thing I can really appreciate is that they were trying to recapture the essence of what made Sonic stories good in the first place. They made Sonic cool again. The story took itself seriously. Frontiers gave us some great memorable Sonic moments that really pushed him to his limits, and the memories and moments in this game are going to be things that stick with us long after this game's release. It's been a long time since we got serious, dire existential stakes in a Sonic story with all the supersonic boss fights and all of the cool moments and dialogue between the characters. Not only was the story a significantly different tone than the decade prior, in my opinion, the writing and dialogue between the characters was significantly improved as well, and that is because they brought on writer Ian Flynn. Ian Flynn has been involved with writing Sonic stories since 2006 with Archie Comics, and he was previously one of the writers for the comic books in IDW prior to getting brought on for Sonic Frontiers. And Sonic Frontiers ended up being one of the fastest selling 3D Sonic games of all time. The success of Frontiers and kind of giving Sonic fans what they wanted to see after all these years is probably going to lead them to having a stronger emphasis on stories and lore. For those who don't know, they hired a lore manager back in 2022 to make the universe more meaningfully connected. So it seems like leaning back into that signature identity that Sonic has that kind of separates him from his contemporaries is something that they're going to focus on going forward. Even by looking at the next mainline title, Sonic and Shadow Generations, the Shadow portion is definitely going to lean into Shadow the Hedgehog's backstory, which is one of the most compelling stories that Sega's ever told before. It seems like Sega may be leaning into these like more in-depth stories going forward. It's not to say that every single story needs to have the dire existential stakes, but I think at the very least, one thing that these games cannot have is mischaracterization or bad dialogue. The story doesn't have to be super crazy, but you also want these characters to be handled well, and I think that's going to be a priority going forward. So, after all that, do Sonic games need good stories? Well, obviously the answer to that is a little bit complicated. Does a video game need a good story? Games like Sonic Generations, while few and far in between, prove that you don't need a good story, but here's the problem. Not every Sonic game is as good as Sonic Generations. It only works if the gameplay is absolutely fire like Sonic Generations. This is not a perfect world we live in, okay? Me, I think it is extremely important though that Sonic games do have good stories because I believe that the actual appeal of Sonic, after all these years, all the games that have done so poorly, what is the one thing that kind of binds us together? Is that Sonic the Hedgehog is really cool. Some of these awesome moments and battles that you see in Sonic games are not things that you'll see in other franchises, and these are the moments, at least to me personally, of course this is all my opinion, these are the things that keep me coming back to Sonic over and over again. It's the memories and the chills that you get when you experience some of the climaxes in these Sonic games. To me, it's moments like this that are the glue that binds the Sonic community together. I'm telling you right now, ask anyone who's played Sonic Adventure 2 growing up, even if they're not Sonic fans anymore. anymore, but they all have fond memories of playing this game growing up. And one of the main reasons why people love it and they were so immersed by the story and why it stuck with them after all these years, and of course why it's being adapted for the Hollywood film, is because the story is so good. It's like, do we like every treasure hunting stage in this game? I don't know. Do we love every single mech shooting stage in Sonic Adventure 2 also? I don't know. I mean, listen, I personally don't. You know what we do love? Love Sonic the Hedgehog jumping out of a helicopter on a little skateboard that he made out of the helicopter's propellers. We love the fact that Sonic and Shadow can go super. I just think that's the coolest thing ever. And then we love the fact that Shadow sacrifices himself to save the world. Like, this really got to us. The story that was told in Sonic Adventure 2 is something that is franchise defining. One of the most important things about Sonic Adventure 2, above all other things that people will always remember fondly, is the story of the game. It's one of the things that's integral to the legacy of it. And the moments created in the story are the things that create lifelong Sonic fans, as opposed to people that just come and go. So I think one of the most important things is telling a good story. Most importantly, getting these characters right, because they are so cool when they're at their best. So writing and dialogue and all that stuff, characterization, is extremely important as well. And that's something that I think should not be negotiated on. I think the characters should always be on point. I'd say the biggest issue with the storytelling of the 2010s of the Sonic games is not necessarily that they're lighthearted or have like joke, comedy, funny moments. The problem with these stories is that the characters are written poorly. Like, the writing in this game is not good, and I feel like the characterization is also not accurate. Now, the reason why this is probably, well, one, due to Sega mandates for the writing, allegedly, due to Pontac and Graf's explanation for why the stories were not as good. Also, the fact that these two writers allegedly didn't really even know much about Sonic. So the thing that sticks out about why most Sonic fans don't like these stories probably boils down to the writing, dialogue, and characterization. So those are some non-negotiables for me. So here's what I think about Sonic stories. I think every Sonic story needs to at least be good. It doesn't have to be the most serious story. Like, it doesn't need to be as somber and dry as Frontiers, but it does need to take itself seriously. Unleashed is a pretty good example of that. Like, the story has a lot of lighthearted and great moments, but also the plot in of itself, as well as the climax of the game, does take itself seriously. Characterization of the characters needs to be on point, and it needs to be accurate to all of their descriptions. In addition to that, Sonic has to be cool in every single game. He cannot be a self-referential dork, similar to things like Sonic Prime. I do like when they lean into the shonen storytelling elements, and I think that that is the best direction for Sonic. And I also think that every single Sonic game needs to have a really cool climax. Like, it needs to have a cool final ending that really shows us how cool and powerful Sonic is. These are the things that I think really gives the character his signature identity and has made him so appealing to us for so long after all these years. And it looks like, based off of Sonic and Shadow Generations and Sonic Frontiers, that they're going to look to do that as far as their mainline games go. Well, let me know what you guys think about this. Are you more about gameplay only? Don't care about the lore, don't care about the moments, don't care about the climaxes in the game? What is your ideal Sonic game story?